It's Thursday, February the 9th. I'm Scott.
I'm Rim.
And this is GeekNights. Tonight, the long-awaited, much delayed, as all book clubs will be, book club. With 2 books. I think I already said double. The Little Prince and also Wind, Sand, and Stars, both written by Antoine de Saint-Exup. Oh. Let's do this.
I thought you didn't like the long opening.
That's why I was trying to torture you with the long opening.
Doesn't bother me. I think it's fine.
I want to see if you know how it feels.
You know what? There's no trouble with it. It's fine. Mighty fine.
Great.
Yeah?
Okay.
I guess we should just get right into this in traditional book club fashion. We're going to skip the news and all that crap because...
we got 2 books. We need more time.
We also want these episodes to be relatively timeless since the book club is theoretically separate from Geek Nights in some fashion or other.
Maybe. Yeah. Whatever.
But first, things of the day. You got things?
So at work, we were discussing, talking about stuff randomly, stuff.
Happens.
And candlepin bowling came up.
Ah.
Some coworkers had not heard of it.
I know a thing or two about that.
Yeah, you did it once.
Yeah. Twice. We played 2 games.
Sure. Well, actually, no, we played 2 strings. Oh, shit, son. Yeah, I know that is because apparently another coworker thought to do some YouTube search for candlepin bowling. And he found this video entitled Candlepin Bowling, Paul Berger's Legendary 500 Triple.
Legendary.
So I did some bunch of research, and apparently I learned a whole bunch of shit, because that's what happens when you research things.
Apparently.
All right. Candlepin Bowling, would you believe, was on television, broadcasted between the late 50s and as late as 2006. There was still 2009 even. There was a Candlepin Challenge show that was on Comcast Sportsnet New England. And as late as 2009, Candlepin Bowling was on television. But the most important Candlepin Bowling television program was simply called Candlepin Bowling. It was on these local Channel 5 and it was broadcast.
Channel 5.
It was broadcast between the years of 1958 and 1996. And it was pretty much the Candlepin Bowling show. And it was just on in Boston area, for all those years.
It's really sad that I had more fun Candlepin Bowling than I did with the arcade at Fun Spot.
Anyway, so there was a guy named Paul Berger, and he was just sort of a Candlepin Bowling guy. Obviously, it's not a super professional thing. He was also like a sales something at Sun Microsystems or something like that. But he Candlepin bowled. It was his thing. And he was on this show. He was actually on this show as early as his first appearance on the show was in 1976.
Whoa.
But this video is from his, I think, 43rd appearance on the show in the year of 1992. And in the year of 1992, in his 43rd appearance, he played a match against the defending champion, Dave Richards. Now, I learned what the terminology means, and basically, when they do a a candlepin bowling competition, the rules are slightly different from real bowling. Like, you get extra bonus balls to roll and stuff like that. And they have some sort of system for prize money, where it's like, if you get a mark, which is a spare or a strike, and you get another mark, every mark in a row that you get gets you like a $50 bonus, and then winning gets you bonus. All right, so there's a money thing going on too. But basically, what you get is you get a triple. You play 3 full games, 3 strings, right, which is 10 frames each. And, your 3 scores combined into one big score is your triple, right? So, like, a high 300 triple, it's like, close to 400 is really fucking good. Low 400s is amazing, right? So, this guy got a 500 triple, playing 3 full games in a row. His total score was exactly 500, which was a record for this show of all time. Like, he beat the previous high score of 480 or 90 something, which beat the previous high score of 460 something, which had been the highest score for the longest time. So this is just some dudes candlepin bowling, and you see the champion sort of fails, and the challenger he gets so many strikes in a row. It's just like, holy shit, are you kidding me?
It's kind of like in that old game, One Must Fall 2097, how the narrator, the news person afterward would say something like, that was a fair fight and whatever, but if you trounce the other guy, it'd be like, if you wanted to see a fair fight, well, you were out of luck.
Yeah.
But
But
if
anyway,
you like
this-
a masochistic orgy of violence,
I'm gonna link to part 1, but it's on YouTube, so you got to go through parts 2, 3, 4, 5. You can pretty much just watch parts 1, 4, and 5 because that's where he gets most of the strikes in a row is 4 and 5. But he's already got a substantial lead by the time 4 starts.
so interesting because I am also linking to a part 1 of something. So there was a documentary that I did not know about, or if I did, I'd forgotten, called simply Cold War. It aired in the 90s on CNN, and there's a whole history of like Ted Turner and all these people funded it. It was narrated by, of all people, Kenneth Branagh.
Okay.
Like it was a pretty, and I was watching some of it. It's a pretty great documentary. Now, apparently, it was on TV on CNN in like '98, and recently, like in 2009, the website they had about it disappeared, and it was never released on any format other than I think there was one VHS release, like in 1999, and that was it. It's never been re-aired anywhere, as far as I can tell. It's kind of one of those lost things. There are many people who claim that it was never re-released because the U.S. government reclassified information in 3 of the episodes that had previously been declassified. However, I can't actually find a legitimate source saying that. I find a lot of semi-legitimate sources.
Wouldn't that source be classified? So it would be like you couldn't find it.
It's complicated, but I'm dubious of it actually being classified because I found the entirety of it on YouTube.
Yeah.
So I'm linking to episode 1, Comrades. It is 24 episodes, each of which covers, an aspect of the Cold War, and the 24 together cover the entire Cold War. And there are apparently interviews straight up with like premiers of the Soviet Union and Russia and like Castro and crazy stuff in here.
Okay, so finally the book club you may or may not have been waiting for. Oh my gosh. So before we talk about these 2 books, right, I want to discuss the person who is fun to pronounce his name.
Antoine de Saint-Exup.
Oh, what an awesome name. This dude, people don't really know much about this dude. I mean, people who know about him, but most people don't pay attention. Like, they might know The Little Prince is a great book, but they never look into the person who wrote it or any of the other books he wrote, which is why I chose to do double book club, also because Little Prince is really short. But before, I want to highlight this dude, right? Antoine. So what is so awesome about Antoine? He's just some author, right? Well, no. Actually, Antoine was basically a real live Porco Rosso. He was like, you have this imagination, and in your imagination, in movies, you see like these, fantastic, adventurous figures like Indiana Jones or whatever, right? And it's like, those aren't real. There's no one actually. Yeah, there actually was a dude like that. It was this dude. Like, his life, is like, you read it and you're like, yeah, that's just some adventure book. There was no one actually like, no, it was this dude. He's the awesomest dude there ever was. I mean, no one is like some perfect saint or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I have some criticisms of some of the sentiment in Wind, Sand, and Stars toward the end. He's a little patronizing toward the lower classes, but I digress.
And ladies.
Yeah.
But the point is that, the dude's life was still amazing. He flew the Aeropostale. He wrote all these awesome books.
How do you fly a T-shirt?
Yeah, that's not funny at all.
I think it was funny.
He went down. I guess the way he went down was sort of lame. It's like he probably shouldn't have flown, but he demanded they let him fly a mission, and he flew the mission, and he supposedly got shot down. And this debate as to who actually shot him down and stuff like that. But it's like,
the thing is, it's fitting to the legend of Krauser.
Exactly.
It's the kind of end that you like. That'd be like the movie end to this guy's life, and the fact that was also the actual end to his life was.
But it's like, who do you know these days? Like, look for anyone that you can point to in history that was like.
To whom the phrase "a living legend."
Well,
applies?
I mean, there are people who are way more awesome in general, right? Like,
Norman Borlaug.
Yeah, I mean, this dude is not as awesome as George Washington, right? George Washington is more awesome, right? But in terms of the story of his life being equivalent to an adventurous work of fiction, I don't think you can find a person who is more, fitting that description. So you should read his Wikipedia and such to learn about his awesomeness, because it's just as awesome as reading a book. Might be, and it's a really long and awesome Wikipedia page. It's got photos of him and all kinds of cool stuff. And all right.
So The Little Prince.
Little Prince. So before we talk about The Little Prince, I want to talk about translations, right? Antoine de Saint-Exup, if you did not guess, is it French? I will make fun of you like Glass Joe, only because it is okay. and you do not care. All right.
Il ne parle pas français.
Okay, so I read this book, right? Actually, I'll tell you a story. So when I was little, someone bought me this book, and I have the book right here, and the cover price is $3.95, which is awesome. $3.95, if only, right? And you know, they gave it to me, and I just didn't read it because it was some little tiny book that had weird little pictures in it, and I didn't really care about it. And it sort of sat on the shelf, and I ignored it. And then I read it, and it was the awesomest book. I was like maybe 8, 9, 10, something like that. I think I got it when I was like 6, 7, 8, something like, I don't know, whatever. And it was the awesomest book. But it's fallen apart. It's not doing too well. Even though it still have all the pages here, it's not doing too well. So when I had to reread it for the book club, I bought the new edition. And I realized that, you know, this is originally written in French, obviously, and it's been translated into maybe a zillion languages. I'd be willing to bet that, like, the only book translated into more different languages than this is maybe the Bible, and that's pretty much it. I don't know if that's true. I'm just betting on that.
Well, it's worth noting that this book is probably one of the better-known books if you count the entire population of the world.
Yeah. I mean, you go to any bookstore in any country, you'll be able to find this book in the native language, no problem.
Dude, when
no
Emily and I were in
question.
Japan...
well, in Japan, it's even more popular.
Yeah, but just in Hakone, like kind of like off in the middle of, like just in our travels, we happened to see a Little Prince museum just kind of set up.
They love him even more there.
Yeah.
It's a special, you know, so... But anyway, so the new edition that I bought, right, has color illustrations. Apparently they were originally in color, and the one I had as a kid was black and white. Was not, you know, wasn't the real deal. They're both published by HBJ, Harcourt, Brace, whatever. But the translations are way different, and I just want to read from like the first page so you can see the difference here, right? So the translation I had as a kid was translated from the French by Catherine Woods, right? So let's read like the first couple paragraphs here. Once when I was 6 years old, I saw a magnificent picture in a book called True Stories from Nature about the primeval forest. It was a picture of a boa constrictor in the act of swallowing an animal. Here is a copy of the drawing, right? And this other one here is translated from the French by Richard Howard, so it's different translation. Let's see. Once when I was 6, I saw a magnificent picture in a book about the jungle as opposed to the primeval forest, right? Called True Stories. And see, so my original one said called True Stories from Nature. The new one says called True Stories. It showed a boa constrictor swallowing a wild beast. Here is a copy of the picture. So picture, drawing, boa constrictor, wild beast, right? In general...
wild beast or wildebeest?
Wild beast.
Okay.
Right? You know, there are like there's some significantly different words, right, going on here. Jungle, primeval forest, right? That's pretty different right there. And I noticed just the older translation, it seemed like it was, you know, not that I have the French to compare it to or know French to even do it, but it felt like a more literal kind of translation, right? You know, it's like primeval forest sounds like the kind of thing that you translated, you know, that in French it must be the word for forest and then an adjective.
Yes, in French it is sur la forêt vierge.
Right, that's how you say jungle? Like they don't have a jungle word.
I don't speak French that well.
Like they don't have a word. It seems like it's just like, you know, just knowing
Lorsque je vais 600, j'ai vu une fois une magnifique image dans un livre sur la forêt vierge.
That's enough. But the point is, that's the kind of feeling you get just knowing languages, right? It's just like, oh, that language probably doesn't have a word for jungle. They probably just have an adjective forest, and that's what, you know. But anyway, and I think that actually, you know, that part of it, of course, is the age at which I read it, because I didn't reread the old copy, but I definitely got a different feeling reading it now than reading the old one, and I think that was definitely, at least partially, due to translation, and of course, mostly due to age and life experience.
So, primeval is actually a better translation, because this really translates to, if you go literally, virgin forest.
Alrighty then.
Primeval forest is, I think, a better translation of that than jungle.
But anyway, both by the same publisher, different editions, different translations.
I should warn you all, too, because I'd read the book when I was young, but I wanted to buy it again just to read it. And while it's readable online for free in a number of different places, in fact, I'll link to a place that has the pictures and the translation Scott read first. But I bought just the cheapest copy on Amazon without really looking. And it was totally this ghetto print-on-demand bullshit with a crappy translation and crappy pictures.
So it wasn't even just a bootleg that photocopied and ripped off this good translations. It was just a...
The translation was shit. Like, it was obviously... It had some places that were just wrong or didn't make sense. And the drawings were like pixelated, blown-up garbage in black and white.
Oh, that's awful.
I was really mad about that. But I paid like 90 cents for it.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, this old printing that I had as a kid was $3.95 cover price. This new one, $10 cover price.
Scott, with inflation, that's like $1,000.
Well, I mean, color pictures too. I mean, you're paying for something, and supposedly worse translation. So whatever. So let's talk about the actual book.
So Scott, do you want to start with what it was about or what we liked?
Well, I mean, basically what it was about is pretty simple. This guy's in the desert. He's a pilot. He finds a little prince in the desert. He talks to the little prince.
Well, he's crashed in the desert, possibly prepared to die of thirst if he can't fix his plane.
Yeah.
And little prince shows up and says, hey.
Little prince shows up, and he spends the whole book talking to the little prince, and then the end. That's pretty much the whole book.
So what was the book about?
The book is pretty much about...
I want to see, because I'll point out, I've never read any sort of like analysis of The Little Prince.
This is mostly, one of those books that's like, it's a book for children. It's accessible at a young age. It'll be in the kids section of the bookstore.
No, I'm mostly
but
curious
it's something anyone can read. And what it's about, obviously...
I'm mostly curious if you got the same thing out of it that I did.
No, is that, kids, anyone who is young, does not have these preconceived notions of the world and can see the truth and knows what's really important. And as you get older, you get dumb. And it shows all the different ways, as the little prince talks about all the different planets he stopped at on his journey. And every planet he learned about a way adults are stupid and a way adults, don't, understand what's important in life anymore. He's got the planet with the drunk and the planet
the tippler.
The planet with the guy who's just like lighting the lamp all the time and turning it off. Planet of the guy who's studying, right? And it shows how all these adults have found something in life that they do that, and that's so important, and they forgot what's really important,
I think
which is that you should worry about whether the sheep has eaten the flour yet or not.
What do you mean by the sheep eating the flour? Because I think that it's a little more subtle. That really, if I had to say what this book is about, I'd just simply say it's about imagination. Children have this kind of simple clarity of vision magnified by their imagination that many adults just don't have anymore. I mean, look at the very beginning. The lump that he draws, the hat, and how to a child that's clearly a boa constrictor having eaten an elephant.
That's true.
And how, he makes this point that adults can't see these very simple things because they either lack imagination or they lack perspective.
Yes, but the imagination perspective is, just the tool that children have that allows them.
Because think about the story of the Little Prince. The only reason this adult really was able to, meet the Little Prince, it was born of his imagination because in crashing his plane, he was cut off from the world.
Oh, you don't think he actually found a Little Prince in the desert?
No, there was no Little Prince.
You don't think so?
No, he was...
I think there was.
Especially after having now read Wind, Sand, and Stars, he makes a big point there, not to get into that book.
He does say the word Little Prince in that book.
About...
when he was crashing in the desert.
About how there's certain...
I'll try to find it.
...modes of thought or certain, ways of being and thinking and existing and experiencing that it is almost impossible to achieve unless you're cut off from, I guess, the normal routine of life for some reason or other, or if you were on the verge of death. And I think that this story is about a man who is cut off from the world and is forced to be introspective and come to terms with the fact that he might not survive. And as a result, he imagines this wonderful tale of all the kind of things that distract people like him in the real world, and how here, when he's cut off from all that, he has this sort of clarity of vision that is otherwise inaccessible to him. And the prince dies because he is now free to return to his real life, and there is no way he will fully maintain the memory of the prince, but he has this kind of hope that what memory of the prince he has, he jolts himself out of his mundane life by remembering the prince when he is reminded of the prince by seeing the moon or seeing the stars.
Mm-hmm.
That is my interpretation. I think it's a little more subtle than what you were implying.
Anyway, it's just the kind of thing that, when I read this book as a kid, right? At least my memory of reading it as a kid was is completely different. That's what this book was? And I'm yeah, I remember part of it being this. But
when I was young, I
remember the end being completely different.
The only memory I had of it was I remember it being incredibly sad to me, and I didn't...
I also remember it being the saddest.
Did not remember anything else about it, other than that it was very sad.
I remembered the boa constrictor and the different planets, and that it was very sad at the end.
I know I read it before I read The Hobbit. That's about as close as I can peg it in my life, and I'm pretty sure.
I don't know. I might have read the reverse order. I don't even know.
It was at least before I was in 5th grade, because I was definitely still living in Detroit when I read it, and I remember vaguely what house I was living in. So it had to have been 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade.
Yeah, I remember all the illustrations too, at least in black and white. So seeing them in color was like, oh, they had colors. He had watercolor. They were those things. They existed.
I think the illustrations are terribly charming.
Yeah.
I think
Well, I mean, the thing is, I put like Little Prince as something in my like Facebook profile of like book I like in the book section. So I guess that automatically made me like the Little Prince, which makes me automatically follow the official Little Prince Facebook page, even though I didn't explicitly do that.
Facebook.
So now if you go to my Facebook, like if I go to Facebook, I see all these official postings, and pretty much all it is buy our merchandise, buy our merchandise. Like somebody is manufacturing all this merchandise all the time. It's like almost as much as Hello Kitty. I don't want to say it's as much as Hello Kitty because nothing is that much. But it's like they make everything with the Little Prince illustrations on it. It's like you can buy a wristwatch with elephants on it and shit. It's crazy.
I think of all of it, my favorite illustration, however, is the bit, and I pulled it up here just so I could look at it again, of the Turkish astronomer.
Oh, you like that one?
Who kind of looked like a clown.
I've always
and how no one listened to him because he kind of looked like a clown.
Yeah. I've always liked the baobabs with the 3 trees on the planet.
Nah.
That's always a good one. Anyway. Yeah.
Now there's another kind of secondary point here, that the book's about imagination, in my opinion, but while what you were saying, that children have this kind of clarity of vision and directness that adults often don't have, coupled with imagination. I mean, look at the Little Prince. If he asks a question, he never relents until the question is answered.
Yeah, why?
Yep, because that's how children are.
But it's strange how did this real life Antoine de Saint-Exup, how did he know the mind of a child so well, right?
Well,
it's
he makes that
it's
point.
strange. It's so strange in that we all know the mind of a child. If
no, we don't. There are people who do.
Right, but it's like if we read this book, right, we know, we're like, that's the way I thought when I was a kid. I know kid ways of thinking, and that's the way I see kids thinking, right? But at the same time, we're still adults and we still do the stupid adult shit. Lighting the lights.
It's very difficult. Look
astronomy.
at the moral of this. The protagonist was only able to meet the prince because he was cut off from all that bullshit. And the only reason he can even hold on to that memory is because he's kind of jolted back into it by this memory, by very specific things.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a secondary part. The children are kind of better in this regard, but he also makes a big point about how the naivety of children is very dangerous. I mean, the Little Prince in the story could not understand the rose, the kind of adult world. So neither world can understand the other without these extraordinary circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
The adult understood, the protagonist understood the issue with the rose for the prince immediately, but the prince couldn't.
Mm-hmm. The other thing I like about the book, right, is it's one of those ones where you get this big overall message and everything fits into it nicely, but in each chapter also sort of stands alone as its own separate message.
A little parable of life. Like, don't be the businessman who owns the stars, but that means nothing.
Right. Or like the planet where it spins around so fast, you see sunsets and sunrises all the time, like every few minutes. Or like the drunkard. It's like you learn a lesson about something. He's got all these separate messages all the time for every little different thing. So it's like as you read it, you're like building and building upon. It's like it's like each individual lesson is a puzzle piece in the greater picture. Even though the book is only like 100 pages, not even 83
like
pages.
that.
Yeah. When I was a kid, this took me a few days to read. When nowadays, when I read it for the book club, it took me 2 hours.
I have little deeper analysis.
Well, I mean, there's only 83 pages. I mean, how much analysis are you going to do?
I guess
it's one of the most read books ever. If you want the deepest analysis, you can.
Yeah, but I mean, I think I summed up my feelings pretty succinctly. The only thing I could add is that I think every human being in the world should read this book.
Yeah, multiple times in your life,
if possible,
necessary.
You must read it as a child and as an adult, because maybe it's a zebra storyteller situation. I mean, having read this book again as an adult, I've caught myself a few times already, getting like immersed in some work thing or some Geek Nights thing or some Kineticon thing and kind of stopping and thinking about the Little Prince and then stopping what I was doing and kind of, entering that world for a second.
Yeah, and since it only takes 2 hours, it's like you can just do it. It's not like you're...
it's that moment
It's not like a major investment, so like it's almost like you just need to recharge,
your child laser.
Yeah, the child laser, the child brain laser. So you just reread the book every, year or two or so, to get that, to be like, oh, right. That's what's important about living.
I mean,
I'm not just going to,
Think about the subtle point at the end. How does he remember the prince? Primarily, he wonders what happened to the prince because while the story was imaginative, he doesn't know the ending.
Yep.
So you could almost argue that by knowing the fullness of the ending, there's no more room for imagination. And therefore there's no catalyst to remember.
All right.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk about Wind, Sand, and Stars, which is much larger and will take much more time to discuss.
This is the first book in a long time where I reread chapters simply because they were so beautiful to read.
The
writing is amazing.
I didn't reread chapters.
Well, I reread the section where he flew through the typhoon.
But there were like series of paragraphs that were just so much epicness that I would reread them like 10 times. Right? And it's just like, oh my God, what paragraph did I just read? I must read that again. And it's like,
his writing
I should have bookmarked them, but I failed.
His writing is very direct, and he takes tangents, but they're very stream of consciousness tangents. Like, he'll go in all these different directions, and then it always kind of links back together, and it always has this kind of driving theme. And I like how the dialogue when he's with someone is interjected, and the writing is just fantastic. I have very little bad to say about it.
Well, but the thing is, the writing, it's translated from French. This isn't even the real writing.
That is the strength, how well it holds up.
So who did this translation here on this one?
My translation was...
Louis Galantier.
I have the same translation.
Yeah, we should get Louis Galantier to do Little Prince, is what we should do. Anyway. So, yeah, this book is it's weird. It's not a fiction. This is an autobiographical work, but it's like you wouldn't know. Well, I mean, you would because all these things sort of happened to him, and he's talking about real people that he knew. But it's not written like an autobiography, like here is the story of my life. It's written like here are some stories of my life, and I will tell you those stories, almost like Grandpa telling you about the time or not, whatever, when I did the thing. But he's not just telling you the story the way Grandpa is. He's actually trying to tell you something else, and just using those stories as examples and vehicles for teaching you the thing he wants to teach you in that particular chapter.
This is almost less an autobiography than it is an essay.
Yeah.
Because he has a strong thesis.
And all his supporting evidence is his own life.
But notice how his thesis is very well constructed in that, like, the actual, when he was confronted with death, when he was, almost died in the desert of thirst after having crashed, most people who write about this book kind of talk about how that's what the book is about. Like, that is the story. And yet, he can't tell that story until he sets up all of these other pieces of the argument. Like, if you just read that part of the story by itself, it would almost mean nothing. But having already read all of his descriptions of what it's like to fly and why he flies and why people fly and all these kind of... It sets the stage for that. And that kind of is the first point where he makes his real argument. And then he follows that with the Spanish, the Spanish Civil War, and that's just like further evidence. Like he's exploring that thesis and trying to like understand why the world is the way it is.
Yeah, and what I thought was really interesting, well, at least the part that hit me the most was like I wasn't sure what the overall message of the whole book was, right? Because it just starts off with the craft, and then the tools and the whatever, all the chapters, right? But early on, the part that like I reread at least 10 times was like these few paragraphs, which I can't find because I didn't bookmark anything because I'm a moron, was where he talked about how like, look, was flying the mail really such serious business? Did we really care about getting the mail there, right? It's like, no, we didn't really care about getting the mail there that much, right? Why do we follow these orders? Why do we care so much that the orders were followed and, everything was taken so seriously, right? Did we really care about following orders? No, we didn't really care about following orders.
How
right?
How bookended and paralleled that is in the end when he's talking about the war.
Well, that's what I'm saying, right? Is that, He and then he's like, well, why did we do it then? Why did we, risk life and limb and do all these things to follow the orders and get the mail delivered if we didn't actually care about the mails, right? And the reason is because by doing those things, by following the orders and delivering the mails, a person who does those things will be turned into a certain kind of person, right? And it's all about, these things are what creates this kind of human being. And he shows you all these examples of that kind of human being, including himself. And you're just like, damn.
Look at the
that's
point
a
in the
fucking
war.
human being right there.
When he's talking about the partisans who are going to go, they're acting a certain way. And there's this certain, like, very profound camaraderie and bravado. But then when they're actually given the order, you're going to go fight and probably die, then they change 100%. And it's clear that it's the same. They don't actually want to die and fight. At the moment, they do it anyway, but he kind of argues that war like that a good comes out of it. That kind of camaraderie can only be drawn from certain kinds of experiences. That kind of warfare is one of those experiences. He's not arguing that that warfare is good. He's just saying that that is a result of warfare. Maybe we need to find more ways to instill that without killing each other or risking our lives.
Yeah, and I mean, if you read, the final chapter is conclusion, and he pretty much comes right out and it's not. There's no bush beating here. There's no. You'd have to literally be illiterate.
But yet it's
to not, because he says it straight up. He's like, here in the final pages of the book, blah blah. As we served as escort. We who had those clerks were needed of the same stuff as the rest of us, but they knew not that they were hungry. To come to man's estate is not necessary to get oneself killed round Madrid, or to fly mail planes, or to struggle wearily in the snows out of respect for the dignity of life. The man who can see the miraculous in a poem, who can take pure joy from music, who can break his bread with comrades, opens his window to the same refreshing wind off the sea. He too learns a language of men, but too many men are left unawakened. And the final sentence of the book is, only the spirit, if it breathe upon the clay, can create man. It's like, these are the things that make a man what he is, right? Flying a plane through a horrible typhoon, and, this experience, a man is clay, and these experiences mold that man. And this is the kind of man, this kind of experience makes that kind of man. And you don't have to be a pilot. You could be a computer programmer or a nerd or a guy who really likes hentai or a swimmer or whatever it is that you do. But if you do it in a certain way, then it will craft you into a real man.
Now, he makes many other...
Who is awakened.
In the course of his argument, he makes many other interesting points. And I think the most... profound one that I kind of want to talk about is the idea of what horror is. And he says very clearly, I forget the exact words, that horror is kind of a construction after the event. There is no such thing as horror in the moment. Horror comes afterward when you reflect on what happened. He goes at great lengths to explain what it was like to fly through that typhoon, and yet he also goes to great lengths to explain that it is impossible to truly explain the experience, because he almost has to exaggerate it because the mere facts of the events don't underscore what it truly feels like. But yet, at no point in these, death-defying moments is a person truly afraid or truly horrified. It's only afterward, when they reflect upon how close they came to death. It's like men will walk stoically into death and are only afraid of it after they've survived.
Well, like the totally awesome dude who crashed in the snow in Chile and then walked through the snow.
But notice that the man survived.
Was that Guillaume, I think, did that, right?
He had the will to survive, and yet what he said about the experience was, what I went through is something I would suffer no animal to experience.
Yep.
But he went through it anyway. The horror came after the fact.
Mm-hmm. And even while the book covers horror, it also covers like the exact opposite. One of my favorite parts was when he's in, I think, Argentina, and he's just in this house with the people who live in the woods.
The girls?
With the two girls, right?
With the snakes?
And the way he described this house with the snakes, it was like a house that was really tight, but everything was sort of, natural and quaint, but in its place. And, the house had like a creaky floor. And I was like, it's like when you just think back to when you were a kid, like crawling in like tiny hidey holes and, tree houses out back and that sort of thing.
He made an interesting secondary point there, too, about those two girls who were so full of kind of vigor and spirit. And he kind of laments, like, oh, they'll probably marry someone stupid and become boring.
Yep. But it's like they lived in just this awesome place, and at that time, in that moment, in that place, there were all these awesome things in this totally awesome house. I don't have a word besides awesome, but it's just like I absolutely 100% felt like I was in that place, and like I wanted to live there in that house.
This is one of the more beautiful books I've ever read. Like I cannot recommend it enough. Actually, I was surprised that our friend Phil hadn't read it yet. I'm going to make sure he reads it.
Well, I mean, every human being should read it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's going to be available in your language. Maybe not as many as Little Prince, but
these
enough.
two books in a pair are a very profound pair because they have very similar messages and they complement each other to a great degree.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the same dude,
yeah.
Right? I mean, crash landing in the desert. The word Little Prince does appear in Wind, Sand, and Stars in a spot.
I also enjoyed a lot of the little stories, like the bit about the British fort that was attacked by the one group of like local Moors or Arab Muslim, his general. the racism of the era shines through, and I tried to overlook it because it
Yeah,
was the
there's
era.
also I also sort of like there wasn't any overt sexism, but he's always
It was there.
it's all about men. He doesn't talk about ladies, right?
He seems to imply that many women become dulled by their choice of mate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I try to overlook anything that is clearly a product of its time.
The
but
dude was alive between 1900 and 1944.
Yeah,
so.
but I love that story where the one tribe attacks the British fort in the desert while one of the other tribes happened to be having a parlay over tea. And the other tribe fought against, the tribe with the British. And then when it was that tribe's turn to attack the fort, because, once again, he talks a lot about honor, misplaced honor.
Well, that's a lot of the kind of thing that'll happen in, medieval times, right?
Yep.
It's like,
But
I hate you, but
the-
you're a guest in my castle, so I can't kill you.
Yep, but how the people coming to attack the fort the next day first send an emissary asking for the ammunition they spent defending the British to be returned to them so that they could then attack the British, and how the British commander complied. That is ludicrous from every possible perspective except from this weird misplaced sense of honor, and how that sense of honor is one of the kind of results of this kind of warfare, which in the end is a good thing, except for the fact that you need warfare to get it.
Right. He's not like, well, killing people's not good, right? But, this sense of honor, these sorts of behaviors, these
Imagine a world where people
following these policies creates a certain kind of man, which
Imagine a world where
is
that
an awakened man.
where that conversation happened, and then the tribe that asked for it and the general who agreed to it decided not to fight anymore because of that moment. Things like that.
Yep. Another great one, the part that I loved the second most,
Yeah.
was with the slave guy.
Oh, right.
Right, he goes to this fort
Mark.
and there's a slave there, but they don't, the slave doesn't use his original name anymore because he's a slave now. And he finally is able to free this slave.
He tried so hard.
And he tried so hard to free the slave, and the slave didn't really get it. He didn't really get it, and then he finally got it. And then he used his real name again, and it was like, "Aw, shit, son. Shit."
The only real issue I take with some of his arguments is that I see where he's coming from, and I see why he came to these conclusions, but
Well, I mean, if you lived a life of an adventurer, right, you...
But his view of the poor is incredibly patronizing. I mean, when he talks about how, the utter destitute find peace in their similitude of their life, like livestock, really, dude? But I can understand, the way he describes, seeing them and seeing their lives compared to his own. I understand why he felt that way, and it's easy for people who are, upper middle class. He came from a fairly wealthy family.
Yeah, dude was not poor.
Yeah, could feel that way. I disagree with his patronizing view, and I disagree with a lot of the kind of assumptions he makes about the nature of the poor.
Yeah, but I wonder if I was an adventuring guy in those days, would I not feel
That's
the same
it.
way?
I cannot fault him for his view, given what I expect his
right?
perspective was.
So he was born in 1900, right? If he had not been tried to guess, did he really try to kill himself, sort of indirectly, right? He demanded he be sent on a mission when he probably shouldn't have been, right? He would be 112, so he'd probably be dead today. But if he was alive in, say, 1990, where he would be 90, or even in the 80s, right? What would he have thought then in the 80s, this guy? If he was 80-something then? I don't know. Anyway, the other part, the part that a paragraph I actually found that I read 1,000 times, right, was when he talks about the Bedouin who saved him from the desert, right? And he's like, "You, Bedouin of Libya who saved our lives, though you will dwell forever in my memory, yet I shall never be able to recapture your features. Your humanity and your face comes into my mind simply as man incarnate.
That was a beautiful section.
You,
right
our
there.
beloved fellow man, do not know who we might be, and yet you recognize us without fail. And I, in turn, shall recognize you in the faces of all mankind."
He bolsters that in the part about war, where he points out we've seen outside of this book, we've seen this in the real world with the Christmas armistice in World War I, but how the soldiers on both sides had understandings. They would fight and try to kill each other, but at the same time, they would sort of they would help each other. There's this kind of, he almost argues that the most common base thing of humanity is that humans in the end try to help other humans unless other bullshit gets in their way.
Yeah, it's like you came towards me in an aureole of charity and magnanimity bearing the gift of water. All my friends and all my enemies marched towards me in your person. It did not seem to me that you were rescuing me. Rather did it seem that you were forgiving me, and I felt I had no enemy left in all the world. Right? He's just looking at humanity as like just, all people are all people, right? You're a Bedouin, I don't care, which is weird when he's, pissing on poor people and such.
Well, because he's not pissing on them. He's oversimplifying their sentiment and their plight. He's patronizing. I'm not saying he didn't hate the poor.
Well, no, he doesn't.
He wasn't a modern Republican.
He doesn't seem to hate anybody,
He wasn't Mitt
really.
Romney.
At least not anyone who's a human being, right? But it's like, he just finds brotherhood in all people. Even though he wants, people to be, these awakened men who have, lived their lives in a certain way, to have their eyes opened and to experience life and to know what's important. Whether that sheep eating roses is the important thing to pay attention to, right? It's like he still finds brotherhood even in some guy he can't even talk to that just came to him and gave him some water. And in that person, he sees all the people of the world, everyone on the whole street, even the lady on the train yesterday who I was trying to help. She didn't know how to use the Yellow Bird and Angry Birds.
Scott, those are the funniest 2 tweets I've read in my entire life.
Right? Is the same as this Bedouin guy, who will rescue you when you're dying in the desert with his water. All people are worthwhile and awesome people.
Well, I mean, what are people but just an extension of the earth? The earth people, and here we are. These are beautiful books. If you listen to this and you hadn't read them yet, you should read them.
You should read any book that's a book club book. That's the point.
If you know someone who hasn't read either of these books, lend them to them.
Or buy them.
Yes.
And don't buy the cheapest one on Amazon. Buy the,
Do a little due diligence there.
Yeah,
Don't
this
get
is
the
one of those
90-cent one.
situations where it's like, okay, you want to pirate books or something like that for your Kindles, your e-readers, or audiobooks. It's like, no, dude, seriously. And it's like the translations are different depending on whatever country you're from. You're going to find a translation in the language you want. Make sure you get the good one, whatever the good one may be, for whatever they're charging. It's not going to be more than $10.
This has been Geek Nights with Rim and Scott. Special thanks to DJ Pretzel for the opening music, Kat Lee for web design, and Brando K for the logos.
Be sure to visit our website at frontrowcrew.com for show notes, discussion, news, and more.
Remember, Geek Nights is not 1, but 4 different shows. Sci-Tech Mondays, Gaming Tuesdays, Anime Comic Wednesdays, and Indiscriminate Thursdays.
Geek Nights is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 license. Geek Nights is recorded live with no studio and no audience. But unlike those other late shows, it's actually recorded at night.